Hey fools, I'm Eric Bleeker. I'm joined here by contributor Daniel Sparks, who specializes across our tech sector. And, wouldn't you know, we're talking about This Week in Tech, looking at some of the most interesting storylines. And for me, a good way to kick off is Facebook and payments. Because, well, we've seen what payments have done for eBay, and now Facebook is getting a little more aggressive in the field. And it's an innovative company that I won't want to be looking over my shoulder at. So what do you think about Facebook and payments?
Well, yeah, it's really interesting. You know, they're trying out this payments. They're doing a trial. And I think it's a great thing for investors to get excited about, because it really shows that, you know, Facebook can take its 699 million daily active users and introduce a new way to monetize those. Mm-hmm. And this is just one of the many ways it could. But, you know, Forrester Research kind of highlighted that there could be a trust issue with a payment system with Facebook, but I'm not so sure that's really the case anymore. I think that over time, Facebook has really developed a relationship with people, and it's changing the way people see social companies. And in fact, we're already using Facebook to log in on third-party apps with our Facebook credentials all the time.
Yeah, and I would totally agree with you there. Trust I actually see as an advantage to Facebook here, in that people are using it to log into other, sites. And, the narrative a lot of the time doesn't match the reality with companies. We've seen with Facebook people saying only grandmas use it, and then they release their numbers, the daily active user count that you talked about. It just doesn't reflect what people are, seeing there. Likewise, the story with people not trusting Facebook is because it's like, oh, what are they doing with our data?
Right.
But increasingly, we just see people give more and more of it to the company. And honestly, if you're already logging in across the internet, the biggest hurdle to innovation, something like payments, is the trust factor, which if you're a startup matters. I think if you're a Facebook established quantity, is an advantage.
Yep.
Okay, so let's move on. We're going to look at Apple now. Back at 500. I keep hearing all this talk about Catalyst, and all we need was just an old corporate barbarian to come in and start making some moves around the company. We've got Carl Icahn buying a minor stake of around $1 billion or so, and sending the company's value up in the day and subsequent day after the announcement around 20 to 25 billion. Pretty impressive there. What are your thoughts about Apple as a stock at $500?
Yeah, $500, it's funny we're talking about this today, because it wasn't long ago when it was trading at $705. Mm-hmm. And I can remember even when Apple was trading at $700 a share, there was still a lot of bullishness involved. There were really bullish price targets. There was, the $1,000 club for Apple, which pretty much it doesn't exist anymore.
Generally, the 52-week high is the peak of bullishness.
Exactly. So I think some of the highest targets are about 800 or so. So, it's really interesting. Today we're talking about how Apple has surged to 500, but it's really still an extremely cheap stock. Fundamentally, this stock, like the market in general, trades at about 18 times earnings, and Apple trades at just about 12.5 times earnings, trades at about 10.5 times free cash flow. It's just a really cheap stock.
Yeah, and I think especially you see so many consumer goods stocks and staples trading even beyond the 18 to the 25 ratio. People have been very concerned about Apple. But one thing I'll note, I think a lot of people said, hey, I'll come back and buy the company after they unveil the iPhone 5C. I'll come back after that September 10th event. I'll come back after we've got a little resolution on events. The problem is when you have a very cheap stock and you're waiting for that validation, it often runs ahead of when you are going to buy it. Who could have guessed that, Apple would surge this much because an event like Carl Icahn buying $1 billion worth of shares? We've had David Einhorn, working with the iPrefs, and they did a very aggressive buyback last quarter, and they extended their buyback program. They've had all of these different catalysts, and everyone's waiting for a catalyst, but it's often the one that you don't expect. So it is in some ways a testament to just buying companies that have good potential when they're extremely cheap. And that's what we've seen with Apple. And like you said, even after the run, under a lot of valuation metrics, it's still extremely cheap, especially in a market that's getting more and more expensive as it surges.
Yep.
Okay, let's keep moving on then. We're going to have the iPhone media event coming up. Well, according to well-informed sources, more informed than you and I.
Yeah.
But it's just about a certainty, it looks like. September 10th, we're going to be seeing the next iPhone, maybe some other products. what are you looking for at this event?
Yeah, we're going to see, iOS 7, and that's it's already been debuted, but we're going to it's actually going to come to the new phones, so that's going to be really interesting. That we're going to see the new iPhone, maybe the iPhone 5S, probably the same form factor. But what's really interesting is the iPhone 5C, what they're calling it, the budget iPhone. And I think I'll have my eyes on that, particularly the price point. It'll be really interesting to see, I guess, how low they can go. How willing are they going to sacrifice? How willing are they going to be to sacrifice margins? How far are they going to take that? So that's what I'll be looking at, is really this iPhone 5C and where it lands.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting because there's this somehow story I keep reading saying Apple doesn't know how to cut prices. And you look at the history of something like an iPod lineup, where it started, north of $400, eventually hitting price points below $100, and most of your iPods today aren't anywhere, near $400. Not that anyone's buying iPods, right? Yeah. But so that's kind of interesting, and they do have a history of being able to navigate this. That being said, the 5C is very fascinating to me. I just don't think a lot of the talks emerging markets, I don't think it's just emerging markets, because right now if you want to go buy a new iPhone in, let's say, Italy, a market where Apple's bleeding market share, and there's still a lot of people buying smartphones in Europe, you have to start with an iPhone 4 selling for something like 429 euros.
Yeah.
That's a very expensive price to pay for a 3-year-old phone.
Right.
So all of a sudden your budget iPhone is able to fill in not only areas like people talk about India and China, well, it's not even about that as much as markets like Europe, any prepaid market this addresses. And like you said, I think the consensus is this launches at $399. Regardless, it's going to be an improvement of the competitiveness in that mid-tier in prepaid markets. But the price point's going to be very interesting. And also, I'm going to be interested to see what features they have on the presumed 5S because, there's so many rumors right now. We've seen liquid metal casing.
Yeah.
We've seen a lot of fingerprint sensor rumors. And one interesting thing is they bought Authentech last year. It feels kind of like this would be a pretty big rush to be able to get this as a key feature on the phone. And the last 4S, it felt maybe a little rush to have Siri on there. And 5, it felt maybe a little rush to have Maps. Yeah. So I kind of wonder, there could be a mistake there, even if that's a key differentiating feature, because I would love a fingerprint scanner on my phone, and I do think that would be a big release for them.
Definitely.
Anyways, so enough about iPhone's event. We're going to look at one last topic here, and that's going to be Baidu. And they had recently bought, they had announced their intent to buy 91 Wireless, and the deal just closed. Okay, so there's a big deal for them. That was $2 billion. What do you think about the stock as a whole, though? Because it is rallying right now.
Yeah, Baidu, it's an interesting story. Just a few months ago, it was about 40% lower, so that's a huge difference for this stock. We're looking at a totally different ball game. And the overarching story is the company, it wants to invest more money in its future. There's a competitive landscape, but at the same time, it needs to start investing in its future. So as expenses are growing, even though revenue grew about 40% year over year last year, the stock they're not able to post earnings growth because the expenses are growing so much. So they're really investing a lot in mobile. And during the second quarter earnings announcements, they actually said 10% of their revenue came from mobile. So we're starting to see a little bit of a payoff there. And that's really what's getting investors excited, is that it looks like it's going to work for Baidu in mobile. 10% is a big number.
Yeah, and it's all about the storyline with mobile services right now. You say, okay, Baidu announced that they're up to 10%. Their mobile revenue does more revenue than Qihoo, which is their big search engine competitor, does in total. That's a good storyline. And if investors are willing to pay more than 20 times sales for companies like LinkedIn and Yelp, well, could they pay more than 25 times earnings for a company like Baidu that is still extremely dominant across the search space in China? Well, yeah, apparently they will, and that's what's going on with the surge right now. And I think you want to look at a couple interesting things. Buying 91 Wireless for $2 billion. The mobile space in China is moving so fast right now. you can't catch up by developing. You basically have to buy your way in, because by the time you try developing your own app ecosystem, you're going to be left in the dust. This is a company that has over 10 billion downloads from their app store. That's a fifth the size of iOS, which is extremely impressive, especially when you consider that, Chinese 3G and smartphones really took off around, 2011, has been ramping so fast. So I think Baidu is making the right moves, and I think it's a great company in that, people are surprised they're doing good in mobile. Why? Why are people surprised? Because they got to copy Google's game plan, and we knew it would have a little bump behind in time because they had to go and get small and medium businesses on this. They had to get their advertisers attuned to it. But now that they've got momentum behind, the momentum builds upon itself. So I think Baidu, even at 135, I would still be looking at buying it today.
Yep.
Anyway, so there's our look at some of the major headlines across tech. And remember, for all your tech news, check back to Fool.com. Fool on.